December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. Battleships sink in minutes. Airfields erupt in fire. But within 72 hours, the United States military faces a different kind of nightmare. One not measured in explosions, but in inches of rain. Across the Pacific, from the Philippines to Wake Island, tens of thousands of American soldiers are sleeping in canvas tents that are literally dissolving in tropical downpours. After just 3 weeks, the fabric rips, the ropes rot, and the floor turns to soup. Commanders send desperate reports home, ammunition soaked, medical supplies ruined, men coughing themselves into hospital beds because their shelters simply fell apart. The War Department's morning briefings grow grim. This isn't just inconvenience, this is collapse. Without real shelter, soldiers can't fight, repair, or even stay alive. By Christmas 1941, Washington's top engineers gather in a war room thick with cigarette smoke and panic. Maps of the Pacific cover the walls. General Eugene Raybould, head of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, listens as his officers describe an impossible equation. They need a building that doesn't exist, a structure light enough to ship across 10,000 miles of submarine-infested waters. Simple enough for exhausted Marines to assemble with wrenches, and strong enough to survive everything the Pacific can throw: typhoons, monsoons, blazing heat, and Japanese bombers. Every option fails. A standard army tent costs $12 but lasts barely a month. A wooden barracks costs $8,000 and takes 6 weeks to build, if you have carpenters, which the jungle does not. And lumber? On Coral Islands, there isn't a single tree worth cutting. Raybould looks over the numbers. To house 2 million troops across hundreds of islands, he would need to build more than 100,000 structures faster than America has ever built anything before. It's a logistical apocalypse. Somewhere in those reports, one small detail catches attention. The British have something called a Nissen hut, a steel half-cylinder invented during World War I by a Canadian engineer named Peter Nissen. It's made of corrugated iron sheets, shaped like an arch, and can be assembled by unskilled labor. The design is genius, simple, strong, and cheap. But there's a catch. The Nissen hut was born in the deserts of North Africa, not the jungles of the Pacific. It laughs at sandstorms, but the tropics are another story. The steel panels are too heavy for manual handling. The ventilation works in Libya, but turns deadly in the Philippines, where inside temperatures reach 120 degrees. Worse, each hut needs a concrete foundation, which means cement, which means weeks of work and a supply chain that doesn't exist. The British design was brilliant, but it would cook soldiers alive and sink in a monsoon. Raybould knows time is running out. Reports from the front grow worse. Soldiers in New Guinea wake up with mold on their uniforms. On Guadalcanal, tents collapse at 3 a.m. during rainstorms, flooding rifles and rations. In some sectors, pneumonia is hospitalizing more men than enemy fire. This isn't a building problem anymore. It's a combat problem. The U.S. Army is losing its war against the weather, so Raybould does something radical. He sends out an open call across America, not to generals, but to engineers. Design us a building, the order reads, that weighs less than a jeep. Ships by rail, assembles in a day, requires no foundation, and survives the Pacific. One line in the margin, adds the impossible, have 10,000 ready in 6 months. It's February 1942. Factories are already maxed out building tanks and bombers. Car companies are converting to war production. Shipyards are running 24-hour shifts. And now, in the middle of all that chaos, America needs an entire city's worth of buildings, made from scratch. 3,000 miles from the front lines, at a windswept naval air station in Quonset Point, Rhode Island. A small group of engineers reads the brief, among them Otto Brandenberger of Strand Steel, a man who has spent years building steel barns across the Midwest. Architects from the George A. Fuller Company, experts in fast construction, and a handful of Navy officers who've actually fought through typhoons. They have 60 days to design a building that can survive the apocalypse. No, one expects them to succeed, but Brandenberger looks at the problem and sees something different. He's built farm shelters that can handle tornadoes. He knows that curves are stronger than corners. He runs his hand across a piece of corrugated steel and whispers, The material already knows what to do. That night, the engineers spread the Nissan Hut blueprints across a table. The arch shape is perfect. It sheds wind and rain naturally. But everything else must go. They list every failure of the British design. Too heavy, too hot, too complicated, too dependent on wood and concrete. Brandenburger has an idea so radical it makes the others pause. What if we make the skin itself the structure? No wooden frame, no internal skeleton. The steel panels will carry their own weight, like the wings of an airplane. In 1942, this is heresy. Buildings aren't made this way, but Brandenburger insists. We don't have time for architecture. We need engineering. By dawn, the plan has a name, the Quonset Hut, after the place it was born. Its DNA is simple, part barn, part airplane, part miracle. The arch will take the wind. The steel will take the heat. And the simplicity will take the war. Over the next 60 days, a warehouse in Rhode Island becomes a factory of ideas. Engineers sleep on cots between test rigs, sketch designs on scraps of cardboard, and eat cold sandwiches over drafting tables. They are building not just a hut, but hope, because if they fail, 2 million men across the Pacific will have nowhere to sleep, nowhere to work, and nowhere to survive. It's March 1942 at Quonset Point, Rhode Island. The Atlantic winds slam against the hangar doors as sparks fly from welding torches inside. 30 men are working around the clock, racing a deadline that could change the outcome of the war. There's no glamour here, just steel, sweat, and sleeplessness. Engineers nap on cots between shifts, drinking black coffee strong enough to strip paint. The Navy has given them 60 days to design a miracle. A building light enough to ship, cheap enough to mass produce, strong enough to survive a typhoon, and simple enough for anyone to build with a wrench. They don't have time for theory. They build by instinct, test by fire, and learn by failure. The team divides into groups. One studies wind and load distribution. Another works on shipping logistics, how to fit a building on a train. A third focuses on the small things that can kill big ideas. Joints, bolts, and fasteners that must survive both rust and rage. They sketch a design in the morning, cut steel by noon, test it by nightfall. When something breaks, they fix it by dawn. It's a rhythm born from desperation. And out of that chaos, something revolutionary begins to take shape. Engineer Otto Brandenburger, his sleeves rolled up and his eyes red from lack of sleep, paces the workshop. He points to a curved panel of corrugated steel. This, he says, is the future. Every traditional architect would disagree. In 1942, buildings are rectangular, made of wood or concrete. Curves are for airplanes, not barracks. But Brandenburger knows the secret. Curves don't fight the wind, they dance with it. He runs a simple experiment. 2 model structures, one box-shaped and one arched, are placed under a wind tunnel. The box shakes, vibrates, and collapses. The arch stands firm, the wind slipping over its surface like water over a stone. That's when the team realizes the truth. The perfect shelter for war isn't a fortress, it's a wave. By week 3, they finalize the dimensions, 16 feet wide, 20 feet long per section, and 48 feet total when assembled. Big enough for 36 men to sleep inside, small enough to ship anywhere in the world. Every detail has a purpose. Panels small enough for 4 men to carry. Arches shallow enough to stand inside, steep enough to shed wind and rain. No internal frame, no foundation, no nonsense. The arch itself will carry the load, what engineers call a self-supporting structure. The stress of the wind spreads evenly across the curve. Instead of pounding one wall until it fails, it's elegant. It's efficient. It's beautiful in its brutality. They name the new shelter the Quonset Hut. Simple, short, unforgettable, like the design itself. The first prototype goes up on May 25, 1942. 6 sailors, none of them engineers, assemble it with basic hand tools after just 4 hours of training. They bolt 96 corrugated steel panels together, attach end walls made from plywood, and watch as a gleaming half-cylinder rises from the concrete floor like a metallic rainbow. 14 hours later, it's done. When they step inside, the air is cool and dry. Rain pounds the roof, but not a single leak seeps through. For the first time, the team believes they've done it. Then the Navy inspectors arrive. Clipboard in hand, skepticism in their eyes. They've seen prototypes before, most of them failures. But what stands before them looks different. They measure everything. Load capacity, assembly time, durability, cost. The results are shocking. The hut's total weight, 9,000 pounds. Assembly time, 8 hours with 6 men. Cost, $1,394, less than 1/6 the cost of a wooden barracks. Even better, it fits perfectly on a single rail car, and the curved panels nest together like bowls. Saving precious cargo space, the Navy's verdict? This might actually work. But theory and test benches don't win wars. Storms do, so the Navy builds a full-scale Quonset Hut on a Rhode Island beach and waits for nature to attack. On March 3rd, 1943, the nor'easter arrives. 75-mile-per-hour winds slam the coast. Waves crash against the shore. Engineers huddle inside the hut, instruments recording every groan, every flex, every sound of strain. The steel shell bends, 2 inches at the crown, but holds. When the storm passes, the hut returns to its perfect curve as if nothing happened. No leaks. No cracks, no failure. The engineers cheer. They've just built a structure that can shrug off a hurricane. But the wind isn't the only enemy. Next comes the jungle test. Humidity, heat, and rot. A prototype is shipped to the Panama Canal zone, where temperatures hover above 80 degrees and humidity never drops below 85%. After 6 months, the hut survives, but the men living inside are miserable. Condensation drips from the ceiling like rain. Tools rust. Clothes mildew. The hut is strong, but it's suffocating. The solution? Ventilation. Brandenburger redesigns the end walls with adjustable louvers and ridge vents that let hot air escape without letting rain in. A small change, $47 per unit. But it transforms the hut from an oven into a livable home. By June 1942, the design is finalized. A building that ships flat, assembles fast, survives storms and laughs at the jungle. A building that costs less than a truck and saves more lives than a tank. They've done it. When the last test finishes, Brandenburger writes one simple line in his notebook. The arch is stronger than the storm. What happens next is beyond engineering. It's industrial warfare, factories. From Pennsylvania to Chicago switch. Overnight, from making silos and car parts to mass-producing Quonset huts. Steel. Rolls off assembly lines, galvanized, corrugated, and cut to exact dimensions. Every panel numbered, every bolt bagged, every instruction drawn in pictures for men who may not even speak English. By August, the first trainloads of huts are heading west to Pacific ports. Each one represents shelter for 36 soldiers. One steel heartbeat in the giant organism of war. June 1942. A thick fog drifts over the Rhode Island coast as the first completed Quonset huts stand gleaming in rows outside the Naval Air Station, each one a perfect arch of steel and purpose. The engineers are exhausted, but they've done the impossible. Now the question isn't, can it work? It's, can we build enough of them before the war outpaces us? The War Production Board wastes no time. They approve mass manufacturing immediately. The design leaves Rhode Island and spreads like wildfire through America's industrial heartland. Factories that once built grain silos, rail cars, and washing machines are retooled for war. The Strand Steel Corporation in Philadelphia, the Fuller Company in Chicago, Great Lakes Steel in Detroit. Every one of them begins churning out corrugated panels, pre-cut end walls, and thousands of crates filled with bolts and braces. Each factory becomes a rhythm machine of hammers, cranes, and molten zinc. Flat sheets of steel roll through corrugators, stamped into ridged patterns that double their strength. Every panel gets dipped in 850-degree molten zinc, a process called hot dip galvanizing. That silver coating isn't for show. It's a sacrificial armor, designed to corrode before the steel beneath it ever does. In Pacific humidity and salt air, paint would last months. Zinc lasts decades. Every dollar spent on galvanizing saves $100 in repair and replacement. Within weeks, the numbers become staggering. In 500 complete huts produced each week. Then 3,000, then 8,000 a month, each kit packaged with military precision. 96 panels stacked like nesting bowls. 2 plywood end walls. Yon crate of bolts, brackets, and wrenches. printed instructions drawn like a comic book, so even a Marine who doesn't read English can follow them. The efficiency is surgical. A single rail car carries 1 hut. A single Liberty ship carries 200. Each shipload equals shelter for more than 7,000 men. As the trains thunder westward, America's factories are no longer just producing machines of war. They're producing places for war to exist. San Francisco, San Diego, Seattle. The ports are lined with crates stamped Quonset Hut, property of U.S. Navy. Longshoremen load them into cargo holds, and before the paint even dries, the ships are sailing toward the Pacific, thousands of miles away. Jungles burn and beaches turn to mud. The Marines fighting on Guadalcanal are desperate for shelter. Their canvas tents rip in the rain, collapse in the wind, and rot in the sun. Then one morning, cargo ships arrive at the makeshift docks. The crates are offloaded under artillery fire. A team of Navy Seabees, construction battalions, gets to work, 6 men. 1 wrench each. 8 hours later, a perfect steel hut stands where there was nothing but mud and misery. The curved shape sheds the rain like a waterfall. The zinc panels gleam like armor. Inside, it's dry, cool, safe by nightfall. 10 more stand beside it. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, finally has real shelter. 3 days later, Japanese bombers attack. A 500-pound bomb detonates just 40 yards from one of the newly built huts. The blast flattens palm trees. Canvas tents disappear like smoke. But the Quonset Hut flexes, shudders, and stays standing. The men inside crawl out, ears ringing but alive. The steel skin is dented, the bolts rattled, but the structure holds. That night, under the dim light of lanterns, a Marine writes home. The tents went down. The huts stayed up. I think these things could survive the end of the world. Word spreads fast. The Quonset is no longer just a building, it's a legend. Across the Pacific, the huts begin appearing everywhere. From coral atolls to volcanic slopes, they rise in rows, transforming empty beaches into functioning bases. The Seabees develop choreography. 6-man teams, 8 hours, 1 hut. Level the ground, bolt the panels, attach the end walls, done. Some crews become so fast that they compete for records. On Espiritu Santo, 1 crew erects a complete hut in 4 hours and 17 minutes. But the true power of the Quonset Hut isn't speed, it's scale. Entire cities rise almost overnight. Airfields, hospitals, barracks, kitchens, machine shops, all made from the same curved steel ribs. The Pacific Islands, once barren and uninhabitable, become a chain of American outposts bristling with planes and supplies. The huts don't just house men, they enable war. Every runway cleared, every bomber refueled, every mechanic turning a wrench under a dry roof is made possible because of this one design. By December 1943, production hits its peak, over 8,000 units a month. A hut built in Philadelphia can be on a New Guinea beach in 40 days flat. The efficiency stuns even the military accountants. 1 Quonset. Hut provides shelter for 36 men for just $1 $3.94 in materials and 60 man-hours of labor. A conventional barracks costs $12,000 and requires 6 weeks of carpenters, electricians, and concrete. The math speaks for itself. 1 Quonset, 1/10 the cost, 1/20 the time. At the height of the war, the United States deploys more than 160,000 Quonset huts to every corner of the globe. That's enough space to shelter nearly 6 million people, built in less than 2 years. But the huts aren't just surviving, they're winning battles. When Typhoon Cobra tears through the Philippines in 1944, the storm obliterates entire bases. Wooden buildings vanish, concrete walls crumble. But of the 43 Quonset huts at Tacloban, 39 remain standing. The rest are damaged, but repairable. The curved steel, designed to deflect wind, does exactly what it was meant to do. Rain slides off. Wind wraps around. The arch endures. The men who live through the storm give them a new nickname, the Iron Tents of God. Everywhere they go, the huts adapt. In the sweltering jungles of New Guinea, troops cut extra vent holes for more airflow. In the frozen Aleutians, engineers add insulation and rubber gaskets to survive -40-degree cold. In Sicily, 1 Quonset hut takes a direct hit from a German 80mm artillery shell. It explodes inside, but the arch channels the blast upward. The hut doesn't collapse. It deforms and stays standing. It's not indestructible. But it's close enough to feel that way. By the end of 1944, the Pacific isn't just a battlefield, it's a steel archipelago. From Guam to Saipan, every island glints silver under the sun. Every curved roof is a promise you can survive here. In less than 3 years, a desperate idea born in a cold Rhode Island hangar has become the backbone of an entire war effort. The Quonset Hut isn't just shelter, it's civilization under fire. August 15th, 1945, Japan surrenders. The Pacific War is over. The guns fall silent, the ships anchor in still waters. And a strange new problem lands on the War Department's desk. What do we do with 170,000 Quonset huts scattered across the world? The huts had done their job. They had housed men in jungles, shielded mechanics on runways, and survived storms that tore through everything else. They were supposed to be temporary, disposable once victory came. But when the dust settled, something unexpected happened. Nobody wanted to get rid of them. Across the Pacific, bases scheduled for decommissioning were still humming. Commanders looked around at rows of steel huts and saw not relics, but assets. They cost nothing to maintain. They didn't rot, didn't burn, didn't rust, at least not fast. You could bolt 2 together for a warehouse, 3 for a hangar, or stack them end to end for barracks that stretched like the horizon. The Quonset had survived the war, and now it was about to win the peace. But the United States government had a new crisis. Millions of soldiers coming home to a country that wasn't ready for them. In 1946, America faced a housing shortage so severe that veterans and their families were living in cars, barns, and even chicken coops. The housing industry was frozen, lumber was scarce, construction crews were exhausted, and materials were rationed. Then someone at the War Assets Administration had a wild idea. Why not sell the huts? After all, they were everywhere, stacked in depots, sitting empty on airfields, waiting for someone to decide their fate. The government put them up for sale. Prices started at just $1,000, sometimes even less. And overnight, the Quonset Hut went from a weapon of war to the backbone of America's recovery. All across the country, something remarkable happened. Entire neighborhoods sprang up, made entirely of Quonset huts. In Los Angeles, Roger Young Village opened in 1946, a community of 750 huts housing over 2,000 people, mostly veterans and their families. In Chicago, Philadelphia, Seattle, and dozens of smaller towns, Quonset villages appeared almost overnight. They were supposed to be temporary, just stopgap housing until the construction industry caught up. But the people who lived there made them home. Families added porches, painted the steel walls bright colors, planted gardens out front. Inside, they built wooden partitions, cozy kitchens and makeshift bedrooms. Soon, what began as rows of gray military shells turned into vibrant little communities filled with life, laughter, and the smell of morning coffee. Journalists came to cover this new American phenomenon. Some mocked it, calling them tin tunnels and steel igloos. But others saw something deeper, a symbol of resilience, of a nation that could turn war waste into new beginnings. Architects, too, took notice. They called it vernacular modernism. Buildings made by ordinary people, adapting technology to real life. One woman in Oregon turned a hut into a flower shop. A farmer in Kansas used one as a grain silo. In Pennsylvania, a church congregation converted theirs into a chapel that stayed in use for 20 years. The huts were supposed to last 5 years. Many would still be standing 70 years later. Meanwhile, schools faced their own crisis. The baby boom had begun, and classrooms were overflowing. Once again, the Quonset Hut answered the call. By 1950, more than 3,000 schools across America were using them as temporary classrooms. Children learned math and spelling under curved ceilings that had once echoed with the sound of bombers being repaired. For many kids, the war was something their parents talked about, but the buildings themselves were part of their everyday lives. The Quonset had become something bigger than a building. It was now a symbol of adaptability. It wasn't pretty, but it worked. It wasn't designed for comfort, but it could become anything: classroom, Church, house, warehouse, repair shop, storage shed, even diner. It was the American spirit in steel, functional, flexible, unpretentious. And while suburban developers like Levittown were building neat rows of identical houses, the Quonset communities felt different, rougher, humbler, but filled with character. They were proof that ordinary people could build their own shelter with their own hands. By the 1950s, Quonset huts dotted every corner of the country. On farms, they stored tractors. On campuses, they became dormitories. In small towns, they became community centers. Even Hollywood noticed. Movies used them as sets for military dramas and post-war stories. They became part of America's visual identity, the unmistakable, curved silhouette of survival. But their legacy didn't stop at home. All over the world, leftover huts found second lives. In Europe, they became refugee housing. In Asia, they served as hospitals, mission stations, and workshops. On remote islands, they remained in military service for decades after the war. The world was rebuilding, and the Quonset hut was everywhere. Architects who once ignored the design now studied it. Why had it worked so well? Because it obeyed the oldest rule in engineering: form follows function. The arch distributed load evenly, resisting both wind and gravity. The corrugations gave the thin steel strength. The modular panels made repair and expansion easy. It wasn't designed to impress. It was designed to endure, and in enduring, it became timeless. By the late 1950s, as America grew wealthier, the humble hut began to fade from the skyline. Families moved from their steel homes into wooden suburbs with white picket fences. Developers tore down the Quonsets to make way for highways, malls, and office parks, but many refused to disappear. Across rural America, you could still spot them, standing behind barns in schoolyards, or at the edges of small airports. Even rusting and weathered, they refused to die. By the dawn of the 1960s, America had changed. The war was a memory, the economy was booming, and sleek new suburbs had replaced the steel villages of the post-war years. But out in the fields, at the edges of airfields, on university campuses, and in sleepy coastal towns, something of the old world remained. The Quonset hut refused to disappear. They stood like fossils from another age, curved silhouettes half buried in ivy, streaked with rust but still solid. To most people, they were relics. To engineers and architects, they were masterpieces of unintentional genius. Because while modern buildings fought against nature, against wind, water, heat, and time, the Quonset had always worked with it. Even as the United States moved on, the rest of the world was just discovering what America had created. Across war-torn Europe and Asia, entire villages were rebuilt using leftover Quonset kits. In the Philippines, they became hospitals and schools. In Italy, farmers used them to store grain. In Japan, they served as workshops, churches, and homes during Reconstruction. And in the frozen reaches of Alaska's Aleutian Islands, Quonset huts from 1942 were still being used by U.S. forces guarding the Pacific frontier. Proof that the same steel designed for war could endure 3 decades of storms, salt and snow. By the 1970s, something remarkable happened. The Quonset hut became a symbol again. This time, not of war, but of independence. A new generation, students, artists, environmentalists, saw beauty in its simplicity. They turned old military huts into studios, garages, and even homes. For the counterculture, it wasn't just architecture. It was philosophy. Why build something ornate and fragile when you could have a structure that lasts? The curved steel, once dismissed as ugly, now looked modern, minimal, even elegant. Architectural magazines began calling it industrial chic. What had once been necessity became aesthetic. Meanwhile, the world kept facing the same old problems: disaster, displacement, and the need for shelter fast. And every time, engineers rediscovered the same solution. When hurricanes flattened the Gulf Coast, Quonset-style shelters went up overnight. When earthquakes leveled cities, aid workers reached for arched prefabs. The principle never changed: lightweight, modular, self-supporting, and fast. It's the same equation the U.S. Navy solved in 1942, and it still works better than anything else. After the Haiti earthquake in 2010, humanitarian engineers revisited the design. They built shelters with aluminum frames and insulated panels, stronger, lighter, cooler. But the DNA was unmistakable, a curved shell that laughed at wind and rain. They called them RHUs, refugee housing units. To anyone who knew the history, they were Quonsets in spirit, reborn for a new century. 2 people could assemble one in 4 hours. They could last a decade in the tropics, and they cost a fraction of traditional housing. 80 years later, the same logic that once saved American soldiers was now saving earthquake survivors. Even in the age of skyscrapers and space travel, the Quonset's design still shows up where survival matters most. In hurricane zones, new homes and warehouses borrow the arch profile because data proves it. Curved roofs resist destruction. Wind slides off, pressure equalizes. Structures survive. When Hurricane Katrina ripped through the Gulf Coast in 2005, entire neighborhoods disappeared, but aerial photos revealed something stunning. A handful of Quonset-style metal buildings, still standing, roofs intact amid the rubble. Engineers studying the aftermath confirmed what Otto, Brandenberger and his team had known instinctively back in 1942, the wind cannot destroy what it cannot catch. Today, modern companies sell luxury versions of the same design. Arched cabins with floor-to-ceiling glass ends, polished steel exteriors and Scandinavian interiors. They cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yet beneath the designer finishes beats the same wartime heart. And on the other end of the spectrum, the same simple Quonset-style shelters are used by farmers, small businesses, mechanics, and disaster relief teams. The design has outlived its inventors, its wars, and even its purpose. But perhaps the most extraordinary chapter of the Quonset story isn't on Earth at all. When NASA engineers began planning habitats for Mars, they faced an eerily familiar list of requirements: lightweight, compact for shipping, assembled by unskilled crews, strong enough to withstand storms. Sound familiar? The prototypes, arched, modular, self-supporting, look exactly like Quonset huts reborn in red dust. Even 250 million miles away, the same principle holds. The curve endures where the corner fails. 80 years after that frantic winter in Rhode Island, the world still builds on the shoulders of those engineers. They didn't set out to make art. They weren't chasing beauty. They were racing time, fighting nature, and solving a crisis that could have crippled a nation at war. In doing so, they created one of the most successful architectural designs in human history. A design that could be built anywhere, by anyone, for anything. A design that turned necessity into innovation, and innovation into immortality. So the next time you drive past an old Quonset hut, rusting quietly in a field, or shining new on a construction site, remember what it represents. It's not just steel and bolts. It's proof that simplicity, when pushed to perfection, can last longer than empires. The hut that sheltered soldiers from bombs, storms, and jungle heat still shelters humanity. From the chaos of war to the fragility of peace. It survived the Pacific. It survived time. And one day it might even survive Mars. But what if I told you the Quonset hut's toughest test still lies ahead? Because the next generation of engineers isn't building shelters for rain or wind. They're building them for other worlds. If you found this story as inspiring as I did, hit subscribe to WWII Book and turn on the bell icon, because in our next video, we'll explore how World War II engineering is quietly shaping the future of life beyond Earth.